welcome back. We today are going to discuss differentiated instruction, focused more on differentiating your instruction within your ELA block. So we're going to be talking about differentiating that reading instruction and content for the students. I have an ELA workbook. So this is a free workbook if you are interested in downloading it. It is bit.ly/Nest ELA workbook, no capital letters, and that'll just give you a free download for taking notes. The first step of differentiated instruction during your ELA block is choosing how you're going to group your students. So if you're going to group your students by skill level, that's going to give you the opportunity to, that'll be a little bit easier for you to differentiate the material and differentiate the content or the skill or how you're teaching it to the students. Whereas if you are teaching or if you're grouping your students heterogeneously, you're going to have to do like group pullouts for differentiation. I ran my groups homogeneously where I grouped them by skill level. So we would take an assessment and I would group them by like ability based. So I had a group that was ready for enrichment and I had a group that needed some remediation. So that's how I ran my groups. But you also have the option to do heterogeneous groups, which we're going to talk about heterogeneous groups now. Heterogeneous groups is grouping your students. If you've ever heard of Kagan cooperative learning, he has some strong suggestions for heterogeneous grouping. So some of the perks of this, what Kagan does and what he suggests is to have in each group, like he has like a high medium, a low medium, and a low. So he has all ability groups or all ability levels in one group so that there can be tutoring, there can be social skills going on with that. The students know who to ask if they have any questions. If they need help on something, they're not going to necessarily have to interrupt the teacher during her pull-out groups because they can ask somebody within their group. So this is one option for grouping. It does also help with classroom management because if, like I was saying, if there's any questions, they can always ask somebody in their group. There's less interruptions with the teacher. So this is one option for you. If you choose to group your students heterogeneously, you will have to do pull-out groups for one-on-one or maybe small group pull-outs for your differentiation, because you're not going to be able to truly differentiate instruction during heterogeneous groups because they're going to have different abilities in each group unless you have folders for students or individual sets of like a bucket or something where each student knows where to go for their material. But typically in a heterogeneous group, like a Kagan leveled group, the students were all working on the same content. So you'll have to pull your students out either one-on-one for conferencing, or you'll have to pull them out for small group to hit that differentiation. So now we're going to talk about homogeneous grouping, which is like skill-based or ability-based grouping. And some perks to that is that you can differentiate the material that they're working on. So even if the students are not at your teacher table learning at that time, they can still be at different groups around the classroom working on materials that are geared towards their skill level. For example, if you group by maybe guided reading level, you can give them a collection of books that are at their guided reading level so that their content that they're getting is at their instructional level. Another perk of homogeneous grouping is that you can, during your teacher time or your teacher group, you won't have to necessarily do pull-out groups. You can just work yourself into their rotation, and during that group time, you can just have all of their materials or the way that you're teaching them differentiated for that skill level. So that's two ways that you can group your students. If you have any other ideas and you would like to share with the people who are watching this, you can put it in the comments. If you are going to be grouping either with heterogeneous or homogeneous groups, you do have to commit to having flexibility and fluidity within those groups. So if you notice any behavioral issues that you need to fix, you can kind of move some kids around. If you know a student needs maybe some remediation, you can put them in a new group. If a student needs enrichment, or if they've grown out of a group, they can bump up to another group. So you're going to have to reassess often, and you're going to have to take behavior and how things are moving into account. I do suggest whatever your groups are at the beginning of the year should not be your groups at the end of the year. Your students should be able to move up and move down and rework throughout the year. So you're going to have to commit to being flexible when you're grouping your students, whether you do homogeneous or heterogeneous groups. So another way that you're going to be differentiating is to have a daily small group, regardless of whether you're going to be able to get all 5 of your daily 5 groups in one day, or if you have to split them up. You should always have a daily small group each day so that you can ensure you're giving those students differentiated material each day. So that gives you the opportunity to focus on individual students and a smaller group so that you can hit their skills and their ability levels easier than if you're teaching whole group. So you'll be able to deliver material that's at their level. If you're giving the students material at every kid has the same material, then you'll be able to scaffold that material into easier chunks for students who might need that broken apart. So this is a really good opportunity to always have a daily small group so that you can do intervention and enrichment every single day. Let's see. So there's a couple questions. Let me see if I can answer them while we're going. Let's see. Do you use daily 5 with your heterogeneous groups? I have actually never tried daily 5 with heterogeneous groups, and y'all can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, because it's been a couple years since I've read the book, but I think the 2 sisters who wrote the books for daily 5 suggest to do homogeneous groups with daily 5. I'm not sure though. I'm pretty sure you can still do daily 5 groups with heterogeneous groups, because if you can go the route of like a choice board where they're kind of picking their own skills, and you're teaching them how to be able to pick books that are at their skill level. You're teaching them how to coach a partner in reading. So if you are teaching them how to do read to someone, they know how to coach each other. They know how to do the checks and the coaching for that. So I'm not sure if the 2 sisters suggest it or don't suggest it. I always did daily 5 with homogeneous groups. So let's see. If you have a high group of readers coming in at the beginning of the year, how would that group be flexed throughout the year? Okay, so if you have a group like 5 students who are significantly higher readers than the vast majority of the rest of your class, I mean, you may end up having those 5 students throughout the school year always being in that higher group. But I mean, if other kids are going to test in to that higher group, I would keep it open just to make sure. I mean, but if your data shows that if you're using data or test scores to group your students, or if you're using different like unit tests to group your students, then I would say stick to the data and make sure that the behavior works as well, because that is a point of it. But I mean, if your data, Jennifer, comes back throughout the year where those students are going to stay in a group, then yes, that works. But there just might be a chance where one of them might have to bump down because another student might need that enrichment a little bit more throughout the year if they test in and out. And this kind of touches on that. One way to track all of it is through documentation. And while you are teaching small group, You need to make sure that you're tracking what each group is doing and what they're using. So I know that this is very important especially when you have your maybe your remediation group or your group that you may be considering might need intervention, because any documentation you take on any group is going to help if that student may need intervention later on in the year, or maybe if they're going to do talent pool or gifted and talented classes, you need all of the documentation that you can get, and it helps keep your differentiation within your small groups in line. So let me pull up this picture. So this is an older grid of how I tracked what each of my differentiated groups did during my hybrid daily 5. So I had 5 groups during my ELA block after we broke out into groups, and 2 of them were differentiated. So I did read to self, read to someone, and writing, and those 3 were not differentiated. Well, I guess read to self and read to someone could be differentiated because I taught the students how to pick books that were best for their skill levels. I also allowed them to read books that they wanted to read, but they knew during read to self and read to someone time they needed to pick books that fit they did like a 3-finger test, I think, and they had to go through and see if the books were good for them. So read to self, read to someone, and work on writing were not differentiated, but I did differentiate teacher time and skill drill. And then the way that I kept track was each group had a different bar and a different day. So I would say what each group was doing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday in teacher time, and then what each group was doing Monday through Friday in skill drill. And this helped me keep track of what language skills and what reading foundation skills they were working on, as well as in small group at teacher time. When we were working on leveled readers, I could track which leveled readers each group had done. If we were working on fluency passages, I could track which fluency passages each group had done as well. One way that you can figure out data, so now we're going to shift over to figuring out which students need what type of differentiation. And we're going to be talking about data and assessments to determine that. So different ways that you can group your students can be from data that you get from a STAR test or a MAP test, and those are the tests that you take 3 times a year. The only problem with doing that route is that you're only getting those scores 3 times a year. So that means you would only be able to move kids 3 times a year unless you use those and then kind of fluidly move kids around as you need. Another way that you can group students would be by fluency skills. So if you're testing weekly fluency or biweekly fluency and you have kids reading 100 words per minute with 0 accuracy or 100 accuracy, or 30 words per minute with some errors in there, you know that you'll have a group that needs to practice fluency skills and word attack skills, and then you'll have a group that needs enrichment. Maybe they're ready for chapter books. So that's another option. And then your third option is to do them skill-based or unit-based. And this one will be very beneficial if you are a standards-based teacher. So if you're a Common Core teacher and you are teaching standards-based units, this will be very beneficial to your students. It will take a little bit more work on your end. So what I would suggest, if you are going to group by unit, that means when you start your main topic unit, you're going to group students by how they understand that specific skill. If you are teaching students the main topic and you want to group them by how well they understand main topic, then I would give some sort of a pre-assessment at the beginning of your unit and then group them by how they did on the pre-assessment. And then once you're done with your main topic unit, you will give them an assessment on main topic, and then you'll start over with new groups on your next topic. So, or your next standard. So that will be a lot of work because you're going to have a lot of different groups each time, but that will be very beneficial to students if you are trying to really focus standards based on getting them to understand those standards or a specific skill. So now we're going to discuss struggling students and how to reach them, and then we're going to discuss how to enrich students as well. So there's different ways to differentiate material for struggling students. It's not just giving them easier material. They're going to need repetition on certain skills, and they're going to need remediation as well, but it's not just remediation. Make sure that you're not just giving them easier work for them to practice. You want to make sure you're changing the way that you're teaching. You can still give them these difficult tasks that the rest of the class is going to do, and you could maybe scaffold it for them, or you could give them more time and more practice. One way that, let me pull this up, one way that this is a third grade passage from, I think, my retelling unit, but it's a myth story where the students have to read the text and then answer comprehension questions. But for struggling students, you might not necessarily want to give them this passage and ask them to do it all by themselves. So you might change the way and slowly let go of how much they're required to do on their own. So one way that I always did it, I would kind of block off the passage. So these passages are a full page for third graders, and if those third graders aren't ready for that, there's different ways that you can break up the passage so that you guys can focus as a group, as a small group, just on maybe a couple sentences at a time, so that you know the students are understanding what's happening. They're finding those standards-based skills within the couple sentences that you're doing at a time, so that they're able to practice those skills instead of relying on their comprehension. So if you're wanting the students to really focus on retelling, then you have to pull out the ability that, or just their comprehension ability. So if they're struggling with comprehension, you need to give them that support and that scaffolded learning so that they can practice the skill and not have that comprehension hindering the skill practice. So that's one way to help struggling students with some reading activities. Whereas on the other end, you can also enrich your students who are ready to be pushed. So, and I just want to reiterate that when you are enriching your students in your high ability groups, that you're not just giving them more work to do, and you're not just piling on more things that they need to get done in the day. So you need to start looking at ways that you can challenge them instead. So you're going to give them things that are more in depth. You're going to give them higher level reading text that's going to challenge them. Maybe it's going to be outside of their suggested Lexile skill level. If you're a second grade teacher and you know you have students who are high flyers, you can pull some third grade reading materials and third grade reading skills for them to start working on those higher level Lexile and that higher complexity text. So you're asking them to do a little bit deeper understanding. So when I taught, I think this was a picture from my second grade class. So I had a group of students who were ready probably in like October to hit those chapter books because their fluency scores were super high. They were acing every single assessment that I gave them. Their MAP scores were super high. So my second graders, they were ready to get into that deeper chapter books where they were reading more content at once. So what I did is I started giving them like book groups to do or chapter studies to do, where they would buddy up and read 2 or 3 pages at a time and write and record their answers in an interactive notebook. So this is just one way that you're going to enrich your students. It does not necessarily mean you're giving them more work to do, because oftentimes that will just burn them out really easily. but you do want to give them a challenge where they are given something that's a little bit tough for them and that's going to make them struggle a little bit, and that's good because they're going to grow from that struggle. So I kind of touched on this in the last couple of slides, but I'm going to talk about how to differentiate. There's 3 different ways that you can differentiate, and one of those ways is to differentiate the material that you're giving your students. So you can, if you are ability grouping, you can give one of your groups, or actually you can give all 5 of your groups different material that is at their skill level. One way a lot of teachers do this is with guided reading books and level readers. So they're giving them those small little readers at their level. So that's one way or one example of differentiating material. You're giving them skill, or you're giving them books at their reading level. You can also differentiate the process in which you're teaching the students. That was like when I showed you the scaffolded King Midas story. You can scaffold how the students, or how much the students are required to do on their own, and just gradually let them go. Also, if you think you have some high flyers who are ready to do it on their own, you can differentiate the process of how they're going to be completing a standards-based activity. So maybe the rest of the class can do a standards-based activity as a whole group, and then you're going to see if those students can do it on their own. So process, or how they're learning and practicing that skill. And then the final one is the content itself. So if you have students who, if you're going to do standards-based units and you have students who have already aced the main topic, like I was just talking about, if you give them that main topic pre-assessment and your students, you immediately know don't need any more practice with main topic, maybe it's your second time around, or maybe it's you're building off of the previous school year's lessons, you might need to actually differentiate the standards or the content itself. Another thing, taking reading out of it and looking at like grammar and language skills, in your first grade classes, and even in your kindergarten classes, you're going to be teaching standards that have a lot to do with printing letters and letter sounds and phonemic awareness, and putting CVC words together. So that's your opportunity. Word work is a big part where you're going to differentiate the content and the standards themselves during your small groups. So that would be like during skill drill, where they're working on nouns and verbs and their phonemes and their word building skills. If you're going to differentiate that material, you'll be able to give students practice on, maybe this group needs practice still printing their letters, and this group might need practice building sentences. So it just all depends on where your students are and what exactly you're trying to differentiate. The last thing I'm going to talk about is a suggested book that I found last year, and it was going to be my book study last year, and I ended up using a different book. It's in my Facebook group, or it was in my Facebook group. I ended up using a different book, but it's called The Differentiated Classroom, and I will drop a link to it. It's an affiliate link on Amazon, but it's just a nice, easy book to read over the summer if you are interested in more differentiation. So there's information. It's by Carol Ann Tomlinson. If you've read this, maybe pop in the comments and let us know what you think. But I browsed through it last summer, skimmed it, almost used it for my book study, but ended up going with another book. But I dropped that in the comments if you are interested in learning more about differentiation. That was the last slide I have. But I also have, if you scroll through the comments, I dropped a link to the blog post that I wrote about the content I just covered today. So if you want to read more instead of watch this video, you can grab that link. Thank you so much for giving me a little bit of your summer time to learn more about ELA. Bye, guys.